Hi everyone, good evening.
Good evening, everybody.
Welcome to another episode of Girl Talk. Glad to be with you again tonight. Thank you for tuning in. It's such an honour and a privilege to be on this platform and sharing nuggets and wisdom with you. I trust that you enjoyed the show last week. We again have Shayoun with us, and I'm excited.
We're not showing live on Instagram yet. So we're just
I'm excited about what we're going to share tonight and all the truths that we're going to discover. So I'm going to just hand over to Sarah.
Hi everyone. So for those of you that missed last week, we had an incredible session with Shayoun. We're welcoming him back again. Hey, welcome back. Thank you so much for agreeing to the part 2.
Yes.
For those of you that don't know, to go and see a financial advisor, roughly what are we looking at today? Just so that they know what these little nuggets that you're dropping in.
Yes.
How much would it cost to go see?
It varies. Some charge by the hour, some charge by the product or the advice they give. You could be looking at anything from £300 per hour to
so they're getting this for free by sitting in their living room.
So a whole hour for free.
Well, no, this is 2 hours because we're very generously giving you a second hour. And the reason why we've done that is because we're super passionate about my dad used a phrase the other day, what did you say? The generation of first, and really that we were talking about and describing the heartbeat of our church, and it's about creating a generation of first where if we can enable you, equip you, help ourselves, then we're all about that. We're all about bringing everybody up to a higher level, and in no ways are we material focused, but like Shayoun said, money is a tool that if used in the right hands can really bring about significant change and really alter cycles, etc. So before we go into anything else, a lot of you actually sent your questions in. Thank you so much. So we're going to just start, I think, probably with the questions first, because we tend to it tends to run away with us, and we start nattering and then we run out of time. So
I want to throw this one in first because we're obviously talking about money. So just to kind of get this one out of the way so everything else sits nicely on top. There's a scripture in Romans 13:8 says, "Owe no man anything but to love one another." What does that mean? Does that mean that we shouldn't borrow money? What do you say?
So that good question. Different people view that scripture, interpret it different ways. For me, I don't think it's a sin to borrow money. I think there is good borrowing and there's bad borrowing. So I think there's different ways you can borrow money. But I think you can be a good steward with what you've been borrowed. And I think ultimately whatever we have is borrowed because we're going to have to give account for it. So I think the purpose of borrowing to better or enable, just like the parable of the talents, is fine. And I think, there's nothing wrong with borrowing if we're going to be good with the borrowing.
And I think, I remember meeting this guy years ago that said, he was believing God for a house, and he believed that God was just going to give him the whole money up front. I don't even know if he's got a house still to this day, because God will use institutions. So the key thing that we want you to understand from this, there's nothing wrong with taking out a loan or taking out a mortgage. It's how you repay. When you miss your payments, then you owe. But as long as you maintain your payments and you're diligent to pay on time, then there's nothing wrong with that.
And I think just kind of shattering that myth as well, that we should have just enough to kind of get by. That's actually a really selfish mentality, because as long as I only have enough for myself, I can never actually be a tool for God to use me to bless other people. For me, any of you that know me, you know that missions is a huge burden on my heart. It's something that I carry all the time. And so for me, I have been on the mission field, and you know, after a while, hugging, even giving free counsel, all of those things don't actually change people's lives, whereas resources do. And so I think that we should all have the goal, if I'm honest, I think that we should all have the goal to be in a position where we have surplus, so that when God does say to us, I would like you to bless that person, I would like you to do this. My desire is that one day I'll be able to turn around to somebody and be like, here's the keys to a house or whatever else. That's the kind of level that I would like to get to. So I think that it's also challenging our mindset to not just think about ourselves, but how can we actually be a blessing to somebody else?
Absolutely. And God's big on that, because he said the wealth of the sinner is laid up for the righteous, not so that we can hoard it all to ourselves and be under the mattress counting our money, but it's so that we can be a blessing to others. And another scripture I love is that that you should lend unto nations and not borrow. That talks about massive surplus, right? So don't be shut off with a topic like this. So be open-minded to what we're going to talk about tonight. So we've got some questions for you that you guys have sent in. So
yeah, absolutely. And just on that point as well, I think if somebody has the faith to buy something outright, I think that's okay as well.
That's great, yes.
I think it's just about where you're at. There's no extreme is the correct extreme. There's nothing wrong with borrowing. Some people are going to borrow money, other people's money, and become multi-millionaires and bless other people, and that's the gospel. And some people will have faith to believe for something outright. It might take them longer, but that's their own personal choice.
That's perfect. All right, so let's get to the first question. The first question is, could you explain to us the process of getting a mortgage from beginning to end?
Wow.
That's a big one.
Yeah, so it's going to vary for everybody because everyone's circumstance is going to be different. But essentially, there's a couple of things that have to take place in order to buy the house. So in terms of getting a mortgage, you need to make sure it's affordable. You need to make sure that you find a lender that will lend to you and meet the amount of money you need. You need to make sure you have the deposit to cover the difference, because no lender's going to lend you 100%.
So when you say affordable, what does that mean?
So there's affordable in the eyes of what needs to meet the lender's criteria.
Okay.
And that means that you have enough income to sustain the loan that they want to give you. And
that's obviously where that's if you have car repayments, if you have school fees, obviously all of that comes off of your affordability, right?
Absolutely. So if you have a car payment that you pay on a monthly basis, that's going to affect how much disposable income you have. School fees is going to affect that. Your credit card balances is going to affect that. Loans you have is going to affect that. So all of your credit agreements are going to affect that. But ultimately, do you have enough money to support the loan? That's going to give you a tick in the lender's eyes. There's also that question to ask yourself, because some people can afford it on paper, but in reality they're not good with money. But I know that's slightly a separate topic. But once you tick that metric, you would go and place an application in with a mortgage broker or in your local bank. How you find out if you're affordable generally would come from speaking to a mortgage advisor initially. So the first step would be speak to a mortgage advisor or speak to your local bank. Or speak to
Shane. Monarch Sterling. Come to Shane.
Come and speak to me. And then once you have met that, once you are deemed to be affordable and your credit's okay and you can prove your income, then you would put in an application. The bank will then assess that application, so they'll make sure that you do get the money that you say you get. You are who you say you are. And then they will what's called underwrite the process, so they will begin to tick their own boxes, make sure you meet the checklist, and they will value the house. Once the house has been valued and everything matches up, you generally would have what's called a mortgage offer, which is an approved loan from the bank.
Generally, how long does that process take? I know it varies.
It does. It depends on how busy the time of the year is, the bank's what's called SLA, service level agreements. But it can take, I've seen it take 2 weeks, I've seen it take a year.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it can take that long. So that process varies, but on average I'd say 2 to 4 weeks.
Can you apply for that if you've not yet found a property?
You can do something called what's called an agreement in principle or a mortgage in principle, which is almost the first stage of that affordability process.
Okay.
Which is where you provide the lender with your information. They will do a soft credit search generally, sometimes a hard one, just to make sure that you would fit their criteria, so you don't have any negatives on your credit profile, and that you have enough income based off what's been given to them.
Yeah.
Once they're happy with that, they'll approve you in principle.
Okay.
At that point, then you can make sure you find out.
But that approval's held for how long?
28 days on average.
Okay, so you have to find something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just another thing, so that you don't run off and start getting all these mortgage approvals. A hard search will affect your credit score. The soft search doesn't, but a hard search will cause your credit score to go down. If you keep having hard searches under your name, it will cause your credit score to come right down.
That's right, absolutely. So make sure you want a soft search. You don't want anything that's going to affect your credit for you.
So would you recommend that the first step, I guess, would then be to actually make an appointment with yourself and actually find out what you on paper could afford?
I think so. I see a lot of people who have been thinking about buying a house.
Yeah.
Have had the idea of buying a house, have heard that they might be entitled to getting a discount on the flat that they've lived in for years. But I think sometimes when you speak to somebody, it begins to help get the wheels in motion.
Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of us like that level of accountability, somebody to check in on us, somebody we can bounce ideas back and forth off.
Okay.
So I would definitely advise speaking to somebody.
Okay. That's good.
Okay. And I think that for me, I know buying my property, honestly, I think I know 100% without a shadow of a doubt. I don't think I know I would have lost the property had I not had you. Like, to be honest, before I spoke to you, I remember speaking to one broker before you, and he pretty much was like, oh, I don't think that they're going to approve you. I don't think you're going to get a mortgage. And it was like he was from the devil. I was like, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. And then I spoke to you, and you were so refreshing, and you were so positive, and you were so affirming, and I can't stress enough the importance of getting a good mortgage broker, because that can actually cost you your property, right? If you don't have a good mortgage broker that will actually be able to go that extra mile for you. So if you're thinking about a mortgage, just phone Shane, because that's the only mortgage broker.
He's being modest.
No, honestly, when I say that Shane fought for me, beyond what any other broker would have done, they'd have probably blocked my calls at that level, but he really fought for me. So I really encourage you guys, don't underestimate the power of a good broker. They really are the center, really. Like, even when my solicitors were being slack, because that's another thing, choose the right solicitors as well, because they can also be a very frustrating process.
Absolutely. I think it's just key to have good people and have a good team, whatever you're doing, because it can be the difference, and you pay for it in the long run. And so a good broker, even if you have to pay more, paying an extra £500, if that's going to save you an extra £50,000, it's worth it. And so I'm a big advocate of paying for advice. The accountant I use is probably not the cheapest. I'm sure there's accountants.com online that I could use, but I actually value his service, and I know in the long run, with the goals I have, I need that. And so people bring their knowledge, their energy, their spirit with them, and it's important to align with that.
That's good. That's great.
And one of the things that came up, which I'd never heard of before, was when we were with the first lender that you found for me,
Yeah.
the solicitor that was recommended to me was from the real estate agent.
Mm-hmm.
And then they weren't, I don't know how to describe it, they weren't like on the lender's panel.
Yeah.
And so I ended up having to pay again for another solicitor.
So what does that
so
mean?
yeah, can you explain that? Because I never experienced that before. I never heard of it before,
Yeah.
and it cost us so much time.
Yeah.
I went with obviously the solicitor, and for me, I was just like, it's a solicitor. Anyone can do this.
Yeah.
And obviously, I learnt the hard way that actually the solicitor that the real estate agent had recommended wasn't able to.
Yeah. So you will need a solicitor. You will need a conveyancer.
Yes.
That can be a solicitor, or it can be somebody who has the certificates to do the conveyancing. Now, your estate agent's gonna probably say use this person, and sometimes that person will be okay. A lot of the time, and estate agents won't like me for saying this, it's so that they're fully aware of what's happening with the transaction.
Okay.
And sometimes it's in your best interest to not use their recommended solicitor. Find your own recommended solicitor, or ask your broker if they have one that they trust, or ask a friend if they've used one. So it's possible that they may not be on the panel. It's possible that your lender may want specific criteria. So my advice would be always wait before you exchange money or instruct the solicitor to do anything.
Yeah.
As long as you can, because ultimately you want to get as far as you can in the mortgage process to know that yes, you're gonna buy this house. It's not going to be pulled from the market.
Okay.
The lender's going to accept this solicitor
Okay.
before you exchange money.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
That's
All
good.
right. So next question: could you break down the cost of a mortgage, legal fees, stamp duty? What is stamp duty?
The government.
I didn't have to pay it. Yay!
Yeah. So more tax.
Yes.
Basically,
Another form of tax.
That's it. It's another. It is literally that. So stamp duty, land tax,
Property
is
tax,
property tax, and that's what you have to pay. There's no way around it.
Yeah.
Some people delay it or defer it, but they still end up paying it. Stamp duty is basically tax that you have to pay every time you buy a house
And what's the percentage?
or land. That varies. It varies on the size of the transaction.
Okay.
So the bigger the transaction, the more stamp duty
So is
you
it
pay.
percentage?
It's a percentage.
What's the percentage?
Yeah. Or it varies. So there's a it
But
depends as well.
there's a bracket, isn't there,
Yeah.
with each property bracket?
So there's a bracket on each percentile for the value of the house. This changes as well frequently, but there's also different metrics depending on whether you're a first-time buyer or whether you are whether you own an existing property as well.
Okay. So you
So
pay
there's-
more if you've had a property before?
Absolutely. So if you have an existing property, you pay more. So the more properties you have,
Even though you may be selling that one, you still will pay more?
if you have one and you are selling to buy another one, that's different. But if
Okay.
you have, let's say,
You're keeping?
if
okay.
you own more than one, then you pay more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then legal fees.
Legal fee, beloved legal fees. So legal fees are just for depends on the transaction. So there's so many different types of transaction, but if we're keeping it simple, your legal fees are the fees that you pay your solicitor or your conveyancer.
Okay.
You can shop around for these fees.
Okay.
You
So
can
roughly what we're looking at?
I would say keep anything between £800 to £1,600 for your
Go for the
legal
higher
fees.
end.
Yeah, but go for a good solicitor
Yeah.
because a good solicitor is key sometimes. I know your transaction, the property was on the market for a while, but there was a time where it was time sensitive,
Yeah.
and that's where you need a really good solicitor.
Yeah.
Okay, what does that mean? I know when you say things like that, people are thinking, what does that mean?
Well,
So-
Time
the seller
sensitive.
that I had was crazy. And she,
Yeah.
and she basically insisted
Yeah.
that she actually demanded that we
Yeah.
give her a completion date, which
Yeah.
Sharon just pulled out the air because we didn't have one.
Yeah, so sometimes you'll get pressure from the vendor, who's
Yeah.
the person selling the house.
Yeah.
But sometimes it might be that you're buying the property in an auction and you have 28 days.
Okay.
Yeah.
All of these things are really time sensitive, and
Yeah.
that's where you need a good solicitor. But not only that, sometimes, generally with every transaction, they'll
Yeah.
do something called searches on the house.
Yeah.
Now, most people ignore these because it never really affects them. But there are instances where there are things on the land that you are buying, so the house is on land, which may have implications later on down the line.
Such as
So, for example, if there is
plans to put a motorway through.
there's plans to put or there is an easement, or there is a part of your land which technically doesn't belong to you, but nobody's ever brought it up.
Okay.
That's the kind of thing they can turn a blind eye to. But then you don't want your next door neighbour coming and saying, well, actually, I own that later on down the line. Or if there's pipe work or gas work, or there are things that belong to British Gas, and there's a clause in there which says every 40 years they can come and dig up your garden to get access to make sure the maintenance is working. Those are things you want to know.
And I know that they do searches on your property, general searches, but I also paid extra, I think £500 to have someone come and actually look at the property in more detail.
Yes.
Now, I know that this is optional. You don't necessarily have to do that. Would you recommend to do it on every property or just older properties?
Generally, I'd say do that. If it's a new...
We've always done that.
I agree. If it's a new build property, then you're covered by a lot of new build warranties. So there are certain things in place which mean that it has to pass a certain standard.
Usually there's a 10-year, I believe, with new build.
With a new build property, there's a warranty. If it's an older property, it's normally outside of that warranty, and that's where things can get quite tricky, because there are things that the naked eye won't see.
I think it's the equivalent to buying an older car without an MOT.
That's it.
You have no idea whether by the time you drive down the road that car's going to break down. So it's better to know those things up front, because there could be foundational cracks, which you're going to be stuck with this property that no one's going to want to buy off of you.
Absolutely. You know, you hear some horror stories, and I think that there are so many ways things can be dressed up. Just like the car may look fantastic,
Exactly.
but the minute you get on the motorway and the smoke starts coming out of the exhaust, then you're going to wish you paid that little bit extra. So those things are a peace of mind, but
I think it's called a structural survey, isn't it?
That's it.
Structural survey.
So
you need to ask for that.
Yeah, so there are really good surveyors out there who can do structural surveys. Sometimes the bank will offer it as well. I recommend getting it all the time. It's money well spent.
For anyone that was thinking about going into property development, I love doing up properties, flipping them, whatever, or wanting to build a property portfolio. What is the best way to do that, and the most cost-effective way to do that? Because I think where most people struggle is the deposit. So if you've managed to generate funds, or do you need to generate the funds? How do we do it?
So it's really good. I think if you have that desire, like with anything, a property, just think of a house like an investment. And if your friend said, go in the stock market and put your money on this, and you didn't have a clue about what this was, you'd be gambling at that point, because there's no information, there's no due diligence. So I'd say research, just like the Bible says, search a matter out. So the starting point would be research. Now, once you begin to understand the areas that you want to invest in, and what the yield is, and how much it's going to cost to renovate that property, you're going to be in a good position to start. Can you do that with a limited deposit? Yes, you can. There are ways you can do it. You can buy property below market value. You can get access to different types of lending. You can borrow other people's money and do a joint venture with somebody. Let's say you have a friend who may be money rich but time poor, but you're time rich. You can say, look, I've done all of the fundamentals. These are the numbers. What do you think? You can go in and work together and come together. You can. There are whole corporations that do it together and chip in together, so that people can get on the property ladder as well.
And that's amazing if people would do that. I think sometimes it's an issue of trust, but I think that's an amazing way, if you can't do it by yourself, to do that with obviously someone you can trust.
Okay, there's another question. Is there any way I can improve my credit score? What on my credit score would hinder me from getting a mortgage offer?
So, yes, you can improve your credit score. Some really basic things. Check your credit score. Most people don't check their credit score.
Can you remind us again how we check our credit score?
Absolutely. So there are credit reference agencies. Some of them you've heard of, some of them you may not, but the reputable ones tend to be Experian and Equifax.
Those are usually the ones that companies use to
Yes.
check, right?
What
So
age do they start building your credit score?
So from
that's a good
18, I
question.
think they start
Okay.
building your credit score. It may be slightly earlier. I think from the early stage you're allowed to be on a credit agreement. I know in different countries that's different, but I'd say between the ages of 16 and 18.
So would you recommend as parents that we intentionally start doing things for our kids to build their credit score early so that when they
they destroy
you know,
it in a
oh,
second.
well, I would probably get them a card and then, just pay it off every month,
Yeah.
just get them to do little transactions. I wouldn't probably give it to them, but like I would be present when they use it and then pay it off every month.
Yeah.
Would you recommend that?
Absolutely. So getting really small agreements in their name
Yeah.
and making sure you manage the payments, adding them as a card holder if you've got a credit card which allows you to have more than one holder, and building their credit that way.
Okay.
All of those things can really help.
Because most parents would put their children's phone in their name, for example, and
Yeah.
everything in their
Okay.
parents' name.
Yeah.
Whereas it probably is a lot wiser
to put it in their
to
name.
put it in their
Yeah.
name, even if you're the one paying the bill.
Yeah.
So that obviously, they're able to start building that credit
You're
rating.
building that history.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to teach them. You want to teach them to be good stewards as well. So
Yeah.
it's not just about the credit. It's what they're learning as well, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't want them to get 21 and I can get anything I want
Yeah.
on credit,
And
and
they
then
go
all of a
mad.
sudden they're going mad. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you really want to give them that education as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely, build their credit. Credit's key. A lot of us start from a place where our credit's not great, and that's
Yeah.
not really any
Yeah.
fault of our. We just didn't know.
Yeah.
It's a lack of education,
Yeah.
isn't it? Which
Yeah.
we kind of touched on last
Yeah.
week.
That's one
where
of the things that
we-
my husband said.
Yeah,
that
we don't educate. Our parents didn't educate
Yeah.
us. School didn't educate us. So when we found ourselves with a little bit of money in our hands, I
We
remember
went
when
mad.
I used to do my weekend job. It's like as soon as it hit my hand, I hit the shops, and you had no concept. But if somebody had taught me,
Yeah.
because you just did not see beyond the end of your nose when it came to life,
Yeah.
that up the road it will be useful to have built up some kind of saving. So I think it's a really good thing to encourage your kids, and like we talked about last week, talk about money to them, educate them. Don't let them be money illiterate. Let your train, even if you came from a background where you were money illiterate, you have more knowledge now. So make sure you pass that on to your children so they don't go through what we did.
Absolutely.
So from what I remember of credit scores, it goes very poor, fair, good, and very good and excellent. Maybe I think.
I think not that
Yeah.
many.
No.
So.
So they're different. They have slightly different metrics.
Okay.
Yeah.
But in everyday vernacular, is either bad, is
So
either
what if you're
okay,
fair?
or
What
it's
if you're
it's
fair?
good.
That's in the middle, right?
So fair's in the
Pose the
middle.
risk.
Then you
So
have,
what- So you pose some kind of risk.
not necessarily fair can vary with different reference agencies. That's why I always encourage people to get more than one,
Yeah.
because sometimes I'll see somebody who's excellent with one
Yeah.
credit, let's say Experian, for example,
Okay.
Yeah.
and then they check their Equifax and they're fair.
Okay.
And sometimes the difference between being fair or excellent can make a difference between who you can borrow from
Okay.
or
Okay.
what rate of interest you're going to
Yeah.
pay on a car, for example, that you may go.
Yeah.
So I always say check the two.
Yeah.
Some of them hold different pieces of information.
Okay.
Check who's associated with on your credit report. Just monitor your credit report. Go through it. Make
Yeah.
sure everything makes sense.
Yeah.
Phone up, challenge things.
Yeah.
You hear stories about people who challenge things and get them taken off.
Yeah.
I've had that so many times.
Yeah.
Go on the electoral roll and make sure that you increase your credit limit and use less credit.
Yeah.
Your credit utilization is a big thing as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And then if you have bad credit, how do you get better credit? Is it like, because obviously it's kind of a catch-22.
Yeah.
To increase it, you need to show that you can pay things.
Yeah.
But then to show you can pay things, someone has to let you
Yeah.
lend money. So how do you, if you for example lost your property in the
Yeah.
past, I don't know what that's called, when you lose your property, what that looks like on your
So you had your house repossessed.
Repossessed,
Yeah.
yeah. If you've had your house repossessed or something that they regard as a major thing,
Yeah.
can you ever get a property again if you've had your house repossessed?
So some major things would be things like IVAs, bankruptcies, CCJs. All of these things generally last on your credit report for a maximum of 6 years.
Yeah.
There's not a great deal you can do to affect those. You can pay off the debt,
Yeah.
which bodes well, but it's still quite difficult to get credit if you've got any of the aforementioned. But if your credit's just bad because you missed a couple bills or you haven't been good or you used a credit card and you went out of control and now you're coming to your senses. Simple things: pay your bills on time. If you need to, set up direct debits so you don't miss any payments. Pay off more if you can. Pay off the whole amount on a credit card, for example. Use a credit card, pay it off in full to demonstrate that you can repay responsibly. All of those things will begin to show a lender over time that you are responsible. If you don't have any, for example, you don't have anything to help build your credit, you can do something like get a credit card with a small limit and
I think there's ones like Vanquish, which is quite easy to get, and you can control that to help build your credit score back up. So I've got a Vanquish card and I use it, but I pay it off, so I never incur interest. And if you can do that, then that will help to cause your credit score to go up.
Absolutely.
Okay, so another question. Can you talk us through the different types of life insurances and insurances? How important is it to have life insurance?
So
Different types of insurances.
Does it make it any point having one if you have nothing? if you own nothing to your name, is there any point?
You owe no one nothing but to love them. I think it depends. It depends what you want to leave. I think when you talk about life insurance, it's unselfish. It's a product that you don't purchase for yourself. You purchase for others. So some people will have a whole family tree and kids and may not get on with their family, so they don't want to leave them anything. The same as somebody who doesn't have that at this current point in time, but may want to leave that to a family. Sometimes you hear of people leaving stuff to cats, dogs. It's a crazy world. Or even charities, So if
Church.
that's it. So if you want to, I would say think about who you love and think about leaving them better. So I agree. I think you should.
And I think it saves fights, because money, I've seen, my goodness, when it comes to inheritance, families, you find out what's on the inside of everybody. So when you leave, say who has what, it just stops everyone arguing. When there's no will in place, it can tear families apart. So,
absolutely. But then I've seen stories where people fight over the will and say this one didn't write the will and that didn't write the will. But I think a will eradicates that. But for life insurance, yes, take out life insurance. There are different types of life insurance, but life insurance is effectively going to pay when you pass away. It may be up to a certain point in time, or it may be a whole of life policy. Effectively, it's going to pay out when you're no longer here. It should be written in trust for your loved ones, for your family, so it's outside of your estate. There's other things such as income protection, which I think is just as key, and critical illness.
I was just going to mention that one, because if you've been diagnosed with a terminal, they'll pay you before you pass with critical illness.
Even if you don't pass.
Well, with a lot of life insurance policies, they'll pay.
Even if you're still alive, they'll pay you once you've been diagnosed.
So with a lot of life insurance policies, they'll pay you on diagnosis of a terminal illness. But remember, a terminal illness is terminal.
What if Jesus heals you in the process? Jesus, you have to get the money back.
You take the money and run.
Jesus. But the devil in the bag got turned around rescue.
That's it. So you take the money, run. But there's critical illness insurance as well, which is more serious illnesses, but not necessarily illnesses that you may die from. So things like strokes, heart attacks, cancers. People can survive these things, but they do affect your life, and that's where critical illness policy will come into place. it's 1 in 3 people, a statistic states that are likely to develop a critical illness
Okay.
during the course of their life.
Good to know.
It's quite a morbid conversation to
I know,
have.
but it's necessary.
But yeah, it's worthwhile thinking about. Income protection is another one. Some people, if they were ill and they couldn't work, will get sick pay, but sick pay doesn't last forever. So you want to be making sure you protect your income. We talk a lot about I'm debt free, but actually, if you don't have your income and your car breaks down,
Can't pay your bills.
then you're going to be borrowing money. You're going to use that same credit card that you just paid off to go and fix
And
the car.
that's a really important one, because you can get ill or become incapacitated at any age.
Yeah.
It's not an older person's thing. So I think that's really important, especially if you're still young and you found out that I know your father-in-law.
My father-in-law, he earned really good money. I won't say how much, but he earned really, really good money. His family were very comfortable. And I remember Jason and I got a call one day, and he used to work away, and he literally woke up in the middle of the night, and he'd wet himself. And that's where he discovered that he actually had become paralyzed from the waist down. And so he had to army crawl to a phone, and he's basically been paralyzed ever since.
Wow.
And he had
And that's
what
not
they
from
called,
an accident.
No,
That was
so
just waking up to that.
So in the middle of the night, he actually had what they call a spinal stroke. So it was a stroke on his spine, and that basically made him become disabled. So he was actually at work.
Wow.
And he's never been he's never regained his ability to be mobile again. So he's actually not worked, but he didn't have income work protection. So it literally altered their life in a major way.
Especially if you're a tradesman or you need to be mobile to work, it's a massive thing. I think income protection is such an overlooked product that it's key. Even if it's just something such as you like to go skiing. How many times do you hear about someone who breaks their arm or breaks their leg and can't go back into work, or more and more often, especially with everything that's going on with the pandemic, a lot of mental illnesses are stopping people from working. So if you have depression or stress, you can also claim income protection as well. That's something that you need to get signed off by your GP, but that's the kind of thing that may stop somebody from going back to work.
And I think it's really key to know that the earlier on that we take out these insurances, the cheaper it's actually going to be for us. And I think the mistake a lot of us make is, well, I'm young, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm not going to need to do any of these things. But the earlier you do it, the younger you do it, the cheaper it actually will be. So it's actually more beneficial to do that. And I see it like car insurance. You drive your car 90% of the time, 95% of the time. That average changes depending on who we're talking to, but most of the time we will drive for years and years and years and never ever use our car insurance, and it can seem like a waste, but you know what,
Just
the
that
day
one
when
time.
you get hit by someone, or the day that you hit somebody and you're in a car accident, it's so good to know that I don't have that stress of now worrying about how I'm going to pay for this.
Exactly.
So I think it's one of those things that we may never, like travel insurance, for example, 90% of the time we will never use it.
No, but there was one time, I mean, we'd just taken out one of those little short ones we paid like 20 something pounds for, and I'm on a tour in we were doing a Footsteps of Paul tour, and I'm perfectly fine, and then I just started feeling a little bit ill. I thought, oh, I had seafood, it must be food poisoning, and it got so uncomfortable I had to get off the tour and go back to my hotel, and saw a doctor. I insisted to him that this is what's wrong with me. I diagnosed myself, and he says, well, I'll see you tomorrow, here's my number. And sure enough, I had to be admitted, and my bill, I think it was like 50,000 euros.
How much was your insurance?
20 something pounds.
20 something pounds.
We nearly fainted when we saw the bill, but thank God for insurance that took care of that.
Sorry, correction, it was actually £12, the travel insurance, and the bill was 50,000 euros.
50 plus.
Your legs would buckle,
Yes.
right? So if you don't, how do we go about, do we just go on compare.com and get life insurance, or do you advise going through a broker as well?
I think it's good to speak to an expert broker. I think it's good just to have somebody map out some eventualities
Do you do
and go
that?
through a budget. Yeah, definitely. So hit me up, or you can speak to somebody online. I always feel like it's good to speak to somebody who deals with life insurance on a regular basis, just because there's going to be things that through experience or just through continual practice that they'll be able to pass on about the best way. So we already mentioned putting life insurance in a trust, looking at different types of insurance, talking about a lot of the time it's budget driven, but going through your budget with you to see how much you can really afford and how you can get the most out of your money.
And the thing with insurance as well, don't wait until you get sick or you get diagnosed and now you're trying to take out insurance. Take it out now while you're healthy, because no one's going to want to insure you once you've been gone to the doctors and they've like, oh, there seems to be a lump or there's something. That's it. Your insurance is not going to want to touch. No one's going to want to touch you. No one will touch you. So go and make sure you've got those things in place while you're healthy. And that's usually the time we ignore. Well, I'm healthy. I'm good.
I think as well it's so important that we learn to have savings as well, because sometimes, you know, I know for me, when my daughter Kayla, I took her to the doctor and they basically said she needs to go in for emergency surgery now. Her windpipe is almost completely closed. I think it was like 90% closed. And they said that if she didn't get operated on within the next 3 days, she could die. And so we had to whisk her to, we had private health insurance, but we hadn't had it long enough. And they ended up not paying it because they said that I'd taken her to the doctors previously and complained about her ability to sleep, and they said it was linked, so they looked for a way out. It cost us $5,000 to do that emergency surgery on her, but thank God we actually had savings. And I think it's really, really important, because we haven't spoken about that much, that we actually learn to save, and we don't, because a lot of people live paycheck to paycheck, and when there's an emergency situation, I think that's when it throws everybody. So your tire blows out. I didn't budget for £200 this month, and I think it's great to budget and work towards a budget every month, but I think that all of us should aim, like what Jason and I try to do. Obviously that's depleted now because we just bought a house, but what we've always tried to do in the past, and what we're trying to get back to, is to always have a buffer figure that we always have in our bank account. So that's kind of, it always sits above that, so if there's ever an emergency, we can dip into that and it doesn't affect our mortgage payment or this or whatever. How much do you recommend? Like we try and save at least 20% of our salary every month. What do you recommend?
I would say it depends on where you're at. Sometimes it may, I believe that you should always save, but sometimes if you have debt as well, then you want to take a portion of that out to pay your debt, because if you're paying Capital One or Vanquis or whoever .com 20%, but your savings are getting 2%, but actually over the long run it's going to eat into your ability to save. So I would say it depends on where you're at, but 20% is a good marker. I'd also say just have something short term, have something medium term, which sounds like the buffer you have, and have something long term as well, so you're working towards goals. It starts with a budget. People don't like budgets, don't even like the word budget. But really, a budget is, it doesn't have to be a negative thing. A budget is a reason. It gives you it gives you purpose. So when you budget, think about what you're budgeting for. So that 20% that you're saving, we're saving that for if, God forbid, anything happens to our kids, we have options. So I think have a budget, work through that budget, and then have those pots, and then put a percentage in. If you start with 10% in each pot or 5% in each pot, I think accumulate the habit, and then once you have that habit, you'll begin to see how much you can put into each one. But without savings, if that happened and you had to borrow money from someone or take out a loan, straight away you're back in debt. And so what happens is, when you don't save, you repeat the cycle of going back in debt. You use that credit card to pay for that, and now all of a sudden you're paying off credit cards, and you're just repeating the cycle. So savings is a great way, and I just think savings is you owe it to your future self to save,
Yeah.
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 because
yeah.
your future self is going to wish that your previous self
Yeah.
had made that decision.
Well, I did a saving thing with some girls I was mentoring. It was a 1 year saving plan. Most of them had never saved, and it started with the first week of the year saved £1, second week £2. So you're doubling
That's
up
good, yeah.
all the way through the year, and I think it was like 1,500 and something if you put away
Yeah.
those weekly amounts. And I put mine at £10. I started
Wow.
at £10. And I actually managed to save £15,000 in 1 year,
Wow.
because I was so determined. I actually rounded mine up because I wanted it to be even bigger.
Yeah.
But I was able to save an amount that I had never saved before. But I was
Wow.
so intentional on saving that, and it's really possible to be able to do that, especially to be able to say I've got this put away. It's incredible. So I think it's really good to start saving, even if you do that £1 thing. You know what, over a few years you got a few thousand that you wouldn't have had.
Well, my friend Sheikah, I remember when she decided she wanted to buy a house, a flat, and I remember very specifically talking about being intentional. Sheikah literally said, you can all come to my house and eat, but she refused to go anywhere. She refused to do anything. She refused to go to any parties or anything like that. Birthdays, she was like, I'm not buying any birthday presents. I'm not buying any Christmas presents. You know what? She saved a deposit
Wow.
for her flat. And I say that to say that some of us are little social butterflies. Like, we want to jump here, there, and everywhere. But I think that there has to be seasons of sacrifice when you've got a goal, and you have to know, you know what, this is why I'm staying my behind at home for this season, because I need to get to be. And if I keep going to all of these different dinners, going to all of these different things, online shopping, all of that stuff, £20 here, £50 here, it all eats into what our income is, right?
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
this is one that I just started because my husband's been doing it, and he's been got this money going away. It's what's the app? I just come out of it. Moneybox. That's a really good one to save, and I've set that up in my as a direct debit on my account. So a certain amount goes into this saving, and it's shares and ISA, so they invest your money for you, so it kind of works and builds.
They do. So you can set a certain amount and put that away every month, or you can get them to round up to
So
the
does that come out
pound.
like standing order?
So it will come out. It comes out as via like a direct debit, and you can set the frequency of that.
Yes.
Okay.
It rounds up your money and then it puts it into like a mutual fund,
Okay.
which you can have in an ISA,
Yeah.
so it's tax free. And for some people, that's the sort of first stage of investing.
Yeah.
So something like that's really good. There are also some online bank accounts as well now, which help you map out how much you've been spending. So Monzo's one that I like, because with Monzo it tells you how much you spent on food, how much you spent in the supermarket, how much you spent on clothes. You can break down exactly where your habits are and then work from that, because without a budget, without a plan, then everybody's got a dream. It's just like losing weight. Everybody's got this dream figure, but if you don't go to the gym, then it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And actually, I love what you said about putting that £10 away weekly.
Yeah.
It became a point where it was more than a discipline. You actually enjoyed seeing
did,
how much
yeah.
you had saved.
It was nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just incredible having that, and it's like, well, and for me it was like the next year because you'd done that, it's like next year I'm going to do that again.
Yeah.
And you set different goals for something that you may be trying to obtain. It could be, I mean, can you imagine that there were times, especially as you got toward the end of the year, where the amounts became bigger. It was hard, but it just meant I just cut back on everything extra. I trimmed off all the things because I wanted to achieve that. But if you were saving for a property, that would be a substantial amount that you've already put aside towards your property. So it doesn't have to take years and years to be able to accumulate. Put that discipline in place.
So we've got 10 minutes left. So I know we've been answering your questions throughout this whole session, but if there's anybody that hasn't had a chance to ask a question and you'd like to, please put it in the comments now so that we can see it before. I think Pastor Erica's on YouTube, I'm on Instagram, so we'll be able to see your questions.
So if you
put your questions in the comments, so we have enough time to answer it. So we're going to ask the last question that came through. If you do have a question, write it now so that we have enough time to respond. So it says, what age should I be when I create a will, and what would happen if I die without a will being in place?
Good question. So you want a will the moment you have anything that you want to pass on. So if you're 21 and you've bought a house, or you have some gold or some jewelry or anything of value,
or money in your bank,
or money in your bank account, you can create a will. It's really cheap to create a will. You can do it from £100 to £200. You can go in the post office and get a will pack, and you can DIY, or you can just write it yourself and get.
Is that valid?
You can do, yeah.
Okay.
Some people do.
So wait,
I would.
let's go back to the DIY because I like the idea of that. Yeah. What's the DIY?
So there are will packs. You can probably Google them, and it will give you like templates in terms of how to write your will. Now, I wouldn't advise that.
Okay, I was gonna say
because
I was like, that sounds inexpensive.
Yeah, but because there's probably nuance in terms of how you want your will to be.
Okay.
So if you have different people, you want to give this to your sister, and this to your children, and this to your uncle. You probably want to speak to somebody about how that's going to take place, and you want to make sure you have the right person executing the will as well. But in short, as soon as you have something, you can put a will in place.
So every time you get something new, so say for example you had one house when you first done the will, and then you get a second house, do you have to then go back to the people and amend it, or?
Depends how it's worded. You can have something along the lines of your property, but so it depends how it's worded, and depends how you want to share out. So if you have, for example, 2 kids, you could say something along the lines of half of my estate, which will include your properties, will go out to my kids. This watch will go to Johnny, and this bracelet will go to Susie. I was thinking of a name. So you can word it like that, but there are different things. So there are trusts. And there are sort of trust funds. You can get really technical with it, but I think just having a basic will in place is the first place to start. And then I think making sure that the other part of the question is what would happen if you died without a will. It will go into your estate, and then the probate process would take place, and then the government would take their dues and then dish it out accordingly. So
and if you have no relatives, you have no family, the government keeps a lot.
They can do. They will try and give it to your next of kin.
Yeah, but if you don't have.
But if you don't have, then the government will keep everything. So imagine you worked your whole life for the government to take 40% of everything you earn. It's quite painful.
I've got a couple of questions from Jennifer. She said, "What advice would you have to save? What advice do you have to save for a mortgage deposit, especially if you're renting?"
So, really basic level, I'd say write down your goals. I spoke to somebody today, and they said, "Look, I've got this notepad, and this is my dream house." I said, "That's great. You need to rip out a piece of paper, and on that piece of paper, now we need to talk about your steps towards those goals." So I'd say have the vision. You want to buy a house, that's a good thing. But now in terms of saving towards that, let's put some practical things in place. Again, let's start with a budget. How much income is coming in? How much income is going out? Where is the income that's going out going? You may say, I don't have any money, but actually if you go through your bank account, you're going to start seeing Sky Digital bills, you're going to start seeing Netflix bills. You need to start cutting back.
The gym, paying gym rental. Some of those things you can cut out and move that into your saving, because those I'd rather run on the road.
And also reducing the amount that you're paying in rent. So if you're, for example, living in a 3-bedroom property, a house, it might be downsizing for a period, because you know that this is going to enable us.
Share with someone where you can reduce the cost.
This is going to enable us to actually get to our goal and to our vision. And I know for Jason and I, we've always been very clear as to where we're going. So when I'm not doing my nails, for example, when I'm not, you know, watching Netflix or, well, we don't watch Netflix, but Prime or whatever, if I've cut all those things back, it's for a reason.
Yeah.
I know for myself what that looked like is with the kids. They were doing gymnastics, they were doing everything you can think of.
Yeah.
I literally pulled all of that back, and I
Well,
told
it's
the
even
kids,
things like your grocery shopping. When we
Yeah.
were saving, it was like certain
Soup.
things. Yeah, it was like, well,
Noodles.
Yeah.
steak is off
Yeah.
the menu
Yeah.
until we get. You know, we're not going to do that big roast. You just cut back
Yeah.
on every corner.
Yeah.
You trim
Yeah, to
back to
basics.
basics,
Yeah.
and you got to realize when you're in saving mode. You cannot do the luxury
No.
stuff as well. It's a moment of sacrifice until you obtain a goal. I have one other question, or is it two? Can you buy a house at any age or no? What's the youngest age you can buy a house?
So to get a loan, I think you'd have to be 18 as a minimum.
But you could,
18.
if I brought my child a house cash, it can be.
Oh,
a
yeah.
But
of
it's
course.
for a mortgage.
Of course, for a
Yeah.
mortgage, yeah.
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 So, but yeah, you can pass on houses to kids at any age.
And I think the same person's asking, they want to buy a house, but you don't have that much money. You can't go into buying a house if you can't afford it. It's like, okay, if I want to, there's no point me looking at a Mercedes if I can't afford to, number one, purchase a Mercedes, but number two, maintain the Mercedes. There's insurances. So it's not just buying a house. You've got to have enough income to pay the bills, because you're talking about gas, electric rates, all of those things.
Yeah.
So it's not just about getting into the property. You need to have enough income to support the property.
But then, sorry,
No, go
Shane, but just also on the other side of that, you know, when I bought my house, I didn't have a lot of money at all when I bought my first house. But I think that there's certain things that you can do to help you. So what didn't cost us a lot of money, like what you were saying about having that goal really clear, was we would go for drives, and I learned that from you guys, sitting in the back seat while you lot would go for drives. So for that would be one thing. Jerome just texted and said shared ownership is also an option.
Yeah.
For those of you that
Yeah.
don't know what
Yeah.
shared ownership is, you basically own a percentage of the property.
Usually half of the property.
Well, it can be different.
Yeah.
It could be
Do you want to
70%.
Yeah,
explain that real
so
quick? what
shared
that is?
ownership is where you own a percentage of the property. So you may own 25%, 15%, 50%, and you can staircase up. So you can
Yeah.
you can buy more shares in the property.
Yeah.
That's a really good place for some people to
I know a lot
start.
of people that got
Um,
onto the property ladder through that.
Absolutely, there's pros and cons to it. You know, there are some things that are not so great about shared ownership. So every time you staircase, you generally pay for that share of the property at the current value of the house,
Yeah.
which can work for and against you. But sometimes it can mean that you're paying a lot more for the property, and because you don't fully own the property, there are rules in place which put restrictions on the
Yeah.
property. But that's a good option, such as same as Help to Buy, which is where you can get a government loan to contribute towards property. But there's so many different things you can do if you're creative and you have goals. A lot of the time people just don't want to compromise. Maybe moving 5 miles out, 10 miles out, 15 miles out,
Yeah.
and you know, doing that extra drive is going to give you a house and a property which is going to help you build equity to buy your happier
Well, I
house.
remember when you told me how much I could borrow, I put in that amount, and it was like most places like no results. I was like, well, that rules that out. And then the one place that did actually produce results is where I started looking. And I
Yeah.
think that's why I think it's really good that you kind of, because I think you'll be surprised at what you are actually
Yeah.
able to borrow,
Yeah.
and you'll also be surprised at what actually is available to you. Because if
Yeah.
you had said to me when you told me the figure of how much I could borrow, if you told me that I'd be able to buy a 3-bedroom property, 2
Yeah.
bathrooms, I'd have been like, no way.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, if you're a Christian, God can also
Do
perform
miracles,
miracles.
yeah.
So I would say start viewing properties,
Yeah.
find out what it's
Yeah.
worth, go on Rightmove, stalk it,
Yeah.
and start looking and get your affairs in order, and then allow God to come through.
And just on that note, the great thing about a house, which is different to when you buy other assets, is you can actually add value to a house.
Yes, you can.
So, okay, maybe it's not a 3-bedroom now,
Yeah,
but it
can
has the
become
potential to be a 3-bedroom.
Yeah.
You know, it may not be £500,000 now, but actually it's got the scope to extend and go
Yes,
into the
yeah.
loft
Yeah.
and and add
Yeah.
value and renovate the
Yeah.
house. And so sometimes it's just being about the bigger picture and seeing beyond where the house is now.
Yeah.
I think sometimes people just want the ready-made product.
Yeah, and
But-
it's cosmetic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
We're paying for what someone else went and done.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One last one as we're running out of time. Is it better to buy your property under a limited business?
Can be, depends on your circumstances. If you're investing, I'd say yes. If you're living in there, then it's extremely difficult. But I think if you have plans to build a portfolio, what's a portfolio? Owning a couple of
Multiple
houses,
houses, yeah.
multiple houses. I think so because there's tax benefits to owning a property in a limited company. Plus, it's easy to pass on
Yeah.
to your loved ones, dependents as well.
So
Well, if
so
it's a
you would-
limited company.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I know we're out of time, so just quickly, because I haven't heard this before. So if I bought my next property, for example, in a limited company name,
Yeah.
how do I get the credit for the limited company?
it's
So
a-
what is that based on?
So it's the same process. You're going to be the director of the company, just like any limited company.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to guarantee the purchase, but the shell of the shell of the property. So what the property's held in will be a limited company,
Okay.
which will mean that if you sell that property, you're now going to pay corporation tax
Okay.
as opposed to capital gains tax.
Okay.
Which
Corporation
is
corporation tax is a lower rate, yeah, than
That's a
capital
lower
gain
rate, okay.
than capital gains tax.
So okay, so do I need to have had this company like generating money for me,
No.
or it can literally just be I start this company?
You can start the
But-
company today. You can introduce a deposit to the company, and you can go and buy a house.
Oh, wow.
Buy them
There
in
you
company.
go. Options, people.
Well-
one last one. I know we're out of time. Remind us again what people can borrow on. Is it 3 times, 4 times? I know you mentioned that last week.
So some people will be able to borrow 5.5 times because their credit's
Your
great.
income?
Some people a lot less. It depends on the scheme, but on average, you're probably looking at about 4.5 times. I'd encourage you to speak to a mortgage advisor, work out how much you can borrow, make sure your credit's in place, make sure you've got your credit report, shop around, start driving around, get a real tangible feel of the properties. It may not be the area you live in, doesn't mean it's the
Yeah.
worst area. There's so many things that come into making a property a good investment.
yeah.
You want to really make money
Yeah.
on the buy rather than on the sell.
And just
Yes.
some quick tips that my dad taught me, which was look at the past sales history. So if it's yo-yoing, that's
Yeah.
usually not a good sign. If it's a constant increase,
yeah.
growth, then that's a good sign.
Yeah.
Also look at how many properties sell.
Yeah.
So in areas where there's not a lot that come to the market, more than likely that's going to be a good investment for the future because the market's not completely saturated
Yeah.
for that area. And I know that's what we did in Australia, and now it's almost impossible to buy in that area, and that's what makes it so
Valuable.
valuable.
Yeah.
So our property has doubled in
Yeah.
value just because of that fact.
Yeah.
And we thought we wanted to live on the other side of the road where the beach is, and just by being on the other side, literally crossing the road, we were able to buy it at a cheaper level. But now our property is worth what the ones on the other side
Yeah.
of the road were worth when we were looking.
Yeah.
So I think that just do your research as well when you're buying a property. One of the
Yeah.
things that I did was drive to the property at all different times of the day.
Check out the
Yeah.
areas.
That's one of the things my
Yeah.
dad taught me. Go on a Sunday, go on
Yeah.
a Saturday, go after the school run, go to the area on different times and see what it's like.
Yeah, maybe even rent in the area.
Yeah.
Do your research. Check
Yeah.
out the schools. Schools
Yeah.
are a big
Shops,
driver.
yeah.
Transport links are a big driver.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are the plans for the local authority? What's the community like? What's the demographic like? All of those things drive the price.
But we are
Yeah.
so
We
out
are
of time,
out of
guys.
time. Thank you so much,
Shane.
Shane.
Thank you so much.
I am like,
Pleasure.
I need to watch it again because
Yes.
while you're talking, my little wheels are turning. But yes, thank you for your
Thank you.
wisdom.
Pleasure. Thank you
Yeah,
for having
thank
me.
you for
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Before we go, let's just give you a plug one more time. How do we find you? How
So
do we look
Monarch
for you?
Sterling, Instagram's the easiest way. You can find us, direct message us, follow us. Appreciate that, and info@monarchsterling.co.uk.
Yeah. And share his
Can you
his link.
spell Monarch for us?
Of course I can. It's MONARCH and Sterling STERLING.
So let's show him some love. Let's follow
Yes.
him. Reach out to him for
Yes.
all of your money questions. He's a wealth of wisdom.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thanks
See you
for
next
tuning in.
week.
See you
Thank
next
you.
week.